L-I-N-I. So today's video, if you're on my TikTok, you would see that I've been posting a lot about the Cabbage Patch Kids, etc. Shout out to my followers, to the ones that was in the comment section telling me, listen, you need to look into the Cabbage Patch Kids, you need to look into them. I can be a lot science focused because I feel like there's more, how can I say it, research and all of these stuff behind it. So there's a lot of meat for me to get into. I didn't realize how much meat there was in regards to the Cabbage Patch Kids, and I just thought it was one of these lunatic things or whatever, blah blah blah. And like I said, I've never really been into the whole clones things or whatever, because to me that was just something that I just felt like wasn't possible, right? I'm not saying that I'm completely sold on it now, I won't lie, because for me my biggest dilemma is, if they can make clones that look like us, act like us, they're literally clones of us, right? Then they've got actual souls in them. So if you can create clones, right, and then souls can actually inhabit those clones that you've created, then aren't you basically rivaling God? What's the difference between you and God at this point? So do they have this, does that power really do exist? Or are they lying so much about their origins and all of these things and hiding things from us to the point where it's just leaving this massive gap for us to build all these narratives based on? But I'm just going to go off the research that I've found and the research that I've seen, etc., etc. So it's up to you to make your own conclusions. My conclusions, they drift from research to research. It's so hard. I keep looping back on myself because things just don't make sense. Things just don't add up. But we'll get into all of that. All right. So the truth about the incubator babies, yeah? In the late 1800s to the early 1900s, thousands of premature babies in America and Europe were literally raised in glass incubators, all right? Now, they were at display at fairs, boardwalks, and expositions. Instead of hospitals taking responsibility, Coney Island in New York City, yeah, and other places had entire exhibits of living babies in incubators, like a zoo or a freak show. The man most associated with this was Dr. Martin Cooney, who charged the public admission fees, yeah, to view the babies. That's how he funded their care. Many of those babies survived only because of the sight of these sideshow incubators, since hospitals at the time often refused to invest in premature care. Now, I'm not really too sure about that excuse that they gave for the reasons why they had all those incubators for decades on decades and had millions of people coming to visit them, buy babies as well, etc., etc. For me, it doesn't make sense. You lots had all these empty buildings that you lots decided to turn into all these orphanages and foundling hospitals, right? But you lots couldn't put those incubators in private buildings. If you wanted to show off the incubators and what they could do, why not just put the incubators, just about 3 of them? Why does it need to be rows and rows and rows and rows of babies in incubators for decades? What time is that? What kind of people are that would watch babies in incubators in fairground shows and be able to buy them and sell them? So that's why I always say, I feel like when we look back at history and we look at white people and the things that they've done in history towards black people, towards people of color, etc., whatever, and then you think to yourself, you're like, raw, how can people move like that? How can humans have that heart? Like, what's going on? But then you realize when you look back in history that they were bad mind to each other as well. They were out here, they had child slaves, their own people them as well. They were forcing them to do mad labor from early ages. They had so many orphans on the streets, children, right? Like, when you look at the behaviors and then you see what they call the civilizations or the progresses that they say that they brought, right? It doesn't add up. And then when you look at all the history that's been rewritten, right, and been relabeled in their images, with their names, etc., etc., it's as if they stole a whole world, right? Emptied it out. Look at all the fires, the floods that went on in America, in Europe, in Asia. This whole reset was about wiping people out and putting a desired new population in. Anyway, digressing a little, sorry. Many hospitals didn't actually adopt incubators widely until the 1940s to 1950s. That's over 100 years after they were doing this stuff in the world fairs. Don't you think that's a bit strange? That means for decades, premature babies' survival literally depended on being part of carnival attractions. So, society normalized looking at struggling babies like entertainment instead of demanding hospitals provide proper neonatal care. So, they frame progress like it comes from pure science and comparison, when actually it often comes through dehumanization, spectacle, and exploitation. Just like with the freak shows, human zoos, or medical experiments on black bodies, incubator babies were another chapter of treating life as an experiment before becoming a standard. They appeared at the exact same time with huge numbers of white infants were mysteriously available, often listed as orphans or foundlings. Is it foundlings, as in they found them, which is what they want us to say? Or is it foundlings, as in founders? Because why are these foundlings or these orphans the ones that founded America as well? Why were they all involved in these secret societies, the Freemasonhood and all of these stuff? Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Anyway, in America, you had the orphan trains, which went on from the 1850s to the 1920s. Thousands of children shipped from East Coast cities to Midwest, often without records. In Russia and Europe, same pattern. Street children suddenly everywhere after wars, famines, and engineered collapses. Some researchers argue this was part of a reset-style program, clearing out certain populations while funneling acceptable babies into new families or experiments. Think about it. Why are there hundreds of thousands of pale-coded babies showing up when black, brown, or mixed babies were often excluded, neglected, or experimented on separately, and also vanished? Because all those indigenous babies in America and all the rest of the world, where did they all go? How comes where were their orphans? If it was all about war and all of these stuff, so where are the war children at the same numbers in America and Europe? And at least with America, we know that there were black orphans, etc. But that would make sense if the indigenous people in America were already black anyway, right? And they wanted people to turn into a slave servitude workforce and to put them beneath, so they wiped all the adults and kept the children, right? Well, some of them, and programmed them, because in America, in Europe, in those days, it was all about, cities were empty, bro. It was all about these foundling hospitals, okay, that were literally training babies and children how to be. And those same people that were in those orphanage were the ones that were sent on those missionaries all around the world, spreading white Jesus. All right, and teaching English and all of that stuff, right? Now, in Russia and Europe, same pattern. Street children suddenly everywhere, yeah? So, it looks like they were manufacturing and preserving a new demographic base, one that needed technology, incubators, adoption systems to survive and multiply. In Victorian England, baby farming became a whole industry. Women were paid to take in unwanted babies, many of whom mysteriously vanished. In America, there were cases where masses of immigrant babies, Irish, Italian, Eastern European, went into these systems, while black babies were funneled into labor or simply not offered the same rescue. So what it looks like is those black babies that were in those countries already, the indigenous, right, that were already there, they were put into labor, whatever, but it wasn't any much better for the other white babies, okay? They were just trained how to be the new reset population, but they were treated poorly as well, okay? But some of them were elevated up. Some of them, because they were in those foundling hospitals, they had that route to get into the Freemasonry, etc., etc., if they saw you as gifted, if they saw you as civilized, etc., yeah? Now, even when they say about these masses of immigration babies and stuff like that, I'll get into this later, but to me it doesn't make sense. If all of the same countries that supposedly were shipping out babies to these other foreign countries also had foundling hospitals within those same foreign countries, so how can both truths be correct? How can you not only have the foundling hospitals and be overrun by orphans, but you're also shipping out orphans to other countries in masses, and then those countries are blaming you or saying that, hey, it's because you sent us all your orphans to us, that's why we've got all these orphans here. But then those other countries are saying the same thing. So how is everybody trying to say that the reason for their orphans is because they came from other countries, when those countries themselves also were overrun by orphans as well, and they're saying that they got them from other countries as well? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? But anyway, I'm not saying that there isn't truth to it. I'm just saying when they try to make these blanket explanations, it just doesn't add up. Now, Russia's incubator exhibitions, yes, Russia had those incubator exhibitions as well, in the early 1900s, tie into the collapse of the Tsarist system and massive orphan waves. But the question is, where were all these parents? Famines, wars, and purges created excuses, but the scale suggests a deliberate orphan creation machine. So, orphan or foundling crisis, sudden waves of pale-coded babies, parentless. Step 2, public solutions, incubators, orphan trains, foundling hospitals. Step 3, survivors are redistributed, assimilated, and became the next generation of factory workers, settlers, colonizers, and soldiers. So this is why it feels like, where did all they come from? Because whole populations were being rebooted, and the incubator was the symbol of modern science saving them. So it wasn't just about saving babies, it was about population engineering, who survives, who doesn't, covering resets, mass deaths replaced with new stock, normalizing artificial survival, keeping fragile lineages alive who couldn't thrive without tech. So, the Great Orphan Crisis. Wait, let me just make sure this is all recording, guys. Okay, yay. All right, so we're good to go. So the Great Orphan Crisis. In the mid-1800s to early 1900s, France was taking in 20,000 babies a year. By 1800s, almost, and that might sound like a little amount, but it was a lot, because during them periods there was about 4 to 5, during these collapse periods, there was about 4 to 5 million people across like the whole of Europe. Like, it was very densely populated. Yeah. So Russia, Moscow, and St. Petersburg founding homes held tens of thousands at once, processing hundreds of thousands in a few decades. England, London Foundling Hospital, plus parish poor laws, constant overflow, plus 100,000 children shipped to colonies. USA, the Orphan Train movement, 1854 to 1929, moved 250,000 children across the Midwest. That's millions of children in a 100-year span who suddenly had no traceable parents. Where are the parents discussing this across all of Europe and the Americas? Where are the parents that were saying, hey guys, they snatched our babies? Where are the mothers that were giving birth to premature babies at the scale of that? Why were there so many premature babies? Where are all those premature baby mothers? And even when you see the clip about them saying that, oh, there was these 40 premature babies were reunited with their mothers, the mothers don't look nothing like the babies. Those incubator babies that they said that they were you can see the coldness between the mother and these babies in that video as well. So it's very strange, guys. Okay, in every culture before this, children were the most protected, rooted beings. Even during war, families fought to keep lineages alive. Suddenly, across the West, whole cities are overflowing with children, but no fathers or mothers. The paperwork always says the same thing: parents are known. It looks less like property and more like reset populations. Now, another thing that I would like to say is, why are all white people related? Why are all Asian people related? Why do all white people and Asian people, they can just look back a couple of generations and all of a sudden they're all related to King Edward or the Queen Elizabeth, but they're like 11th cousin generation. Do you know what that means? If you're like 11th generation's cousins to the Queen, yeah, that means that you lots are sharing like ancestors from about 300 years ago, yeah? But why do they all seem to share ancestors around 300 to 400 year period? Why? That means that there was a lot of inbreeding going on. A lot. Because remember, each generation you're supposed to double your amount of ancestors. So one generation is 4, one generation is 2, your mum and your dad. The next generation is 4, then it's 8, then it's 16, etc., etc. So by the time you get to like 15th generation, you should have about 60-something thousand ancestors. So how the hell are you related to the Queen? Where's all those bloodlines? Why is everybody as well? So it's either with these foundlings, these men really did pop out everywhere and they were really cloning babies and they just pushed them out and they were using the same, because they were clones, they had the same genetics, etc., etc. I don't know. They already explained that there was a lot of incest. They say it was to do with the bottleneck. The reason why everybody related now is to do with the bottleneck. But the bottleneck happened 65,000 years ago, guys. 65,000 years ago. I've already just showed you how in 15 generations you're supposed to have about 65,000. In about 11 generations, you're supposed to have about 65,000 ancestors. So 65,000 years ago, how many generations of ancestors do you think you're supposed to have by then, guys? So even if there was that bottleneck thingy, by the time it gets to these recent times, you lot should already have a lot of high diversity. But what do they say? A European and an Asian is more related to each other than 2 Africans from the same tribe. And when they were saying all of these things, when I first learned about it, I was just like, oh my God, yeah, we're diverse. And I wasn't really understanding it until I realized, hold on a minute. What you're basically saying is there was a lot of inbreeding. That's why you don't have a lot of ancestors. That's why there's not a lot of diversity. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So it's either, like I said, they were cloning people, or they wiped people's parents and their bloodlines, etc., etc., right? And then they just said that, okay, the founders of these reset populations, because there's about 4 people that everybody seemingly is related to, and lead the Charlemagne or whatever that guy is, and the King Edward and whatever, blah, blah. They all lead to these 4 people across Russia, did it, all of them, because they're all the royals are related. The Spanish royals, the royal thingy royals, and then all their people are related to the people that they're ruling, that rule over them. So if all the people in those countries are related to the rulers, and all the rulers are related to each other across countries, then all of them are related. But either they just didn't want to say who people's lineages or whatever, so with the reset populations, and wiped people's lineages away, right? And then just basically made up bloodline roots. So that's why everybody can only trace themselves back a certain amount, and then they hit a tunnel wall or brick wall, etc., etc. But my thing is this: why no stories passed down or nothing? Why is there nothing in history that really shows where these missing parents are, and people in the millions saying, hey guys, they took our babies. And I do know that they bombed a lot of places and all of this stuff and blah blah, but I still don't understand, where's you lots? Because I feel like with Africans, even with all of their funneling us around and migrating us and colonizing us and doing all of these awful things, and we still have that soul memory. Like, we still have that ability to be like, yo guys, like, no, something was going on, like, we still hold that core memory. We still have our oral stories, etc., etc. Where are you, mans? Where are you lot's paintings, the things to show in the engravings and whatever? Why is all of the ancient sculptures and artwork and thingies, why is it all melanated, bro? Where's you man's stories? Anyway, let's continue on. So the phantom time theory, argues centuries of history was fabricated or shifted to cover gaps. What better cover than a flood of nameless children? No genealogy, no ancestry, just a fresh start. population that makes a new timeline look real. And it's extremely convenient, guys. So orphan stock equals blank slates, easy to drop into the new phantom centuries without contradiction. Every reset follows the same rhythm. Implosion, war, plague, famine clears populations. Then explosion, orphans or incubator babies flood into the refill. Then reprogramming, schools, missions, new religions, raise them as the new citizens. The orphan crisis wasn't random. It was a reset, refill stage. Original humans equals anchored in ancestry, which means deep soul circuits. Reset children equals parentless, blank vessels, easy to program. When whole nations are rebuilt on orphans, you're not just changing demographics, you're changing the soul composition of society. That's why today so many family trees in Europe or America hit dead ends around the 1700s to 1800s. The chain was cut. And if you're lucky, some of you will reach back to 1400s apparently. On the 1500s. But that's about it. That's about it. Then there's all these other mythical stories about the 1200s and all of that stuff. But hey, the more further back you go, the more blurrier it gets. The Great Orphan Crisis was not just poverty, not just immortality. It wasn't just poverty, not just immorality. It was the visible fallout of resets. Millions of children appearing without parents, replacing populations that had been cleared. Phantom time theory makes sense here. The orphans were the actors dropped into the new script, so nobody could ask where the old players went. So nobody could ask who built these buildings that we're in. So nobody could ask who built these, like what's going, do you understand? Because people, they turned up to these cities, by the way, already built. And you know how they like to say how, it was all primitive and all of these stuff, but these men turned up to these countries and the buildings were already built. Those huge buildings in the Victorian times that they're trying to say they created, but they never say that when they were built. They always say they were established or founded in. Anyway, so orphans or incubator kids have no parents, no questions, no parents to question, no elders to pass down oral memory, no villages to anchor them. If you need to rewrite history, they're the ideal population. They can only believe what the school, church, and state tell them. So the government, yeah? The entire identity equals you were saved by the system, now serve the system, which is what they did with the missionaries, etc. If Europeans had really overthrown wave after wave of darker populations in open war, there would be folklore, battle songs, and victory myths. Instead, silence. Fairy tales, nursery rhymes, myths about babies from cabbages, changelings, and storks. That's not a memory of conquest. That's a memory hole. And what I mean by that is, if the darker population is just assimilated into white populations, and that's why the white people exist and all these other races, etc. If that was just a bridge line all across, right? Where are the stories? Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Where are the stories of white people remembering that they were black once? Why is nobody speaking them? Where are the stories for them? And the Asians, where are they? Well, Asians, they don't have the same stories, but Asians have Asian stories, and they're all over their caves and and it's everywhere, right? But they just don't admit the direct ancestryhood. They do say the Aryans and stuff like came over, whatever, blah blah blah, but they still hold on to their new vessels. Or do you understand what I'm saying to you? Because what? It's the whole white supremacy. Everybody wants to be closer to the whites. So it's hard with the research and all of these things. Because even when China admitted that, they can see that their ancestry, about 20% of people, was it even 20% or 25%? 25% can still track their African DNA in China till this day. Which is crazy. You wouldn't expect such a large number if it happened 65,000 years ago, guys. But like I said, there's just contradictory information, all right? So the adults who remember the old world, the darker populations, the elders, the griots, were killed in plagues, wars, or famine. And and the Black Plague, guys, let's think of the Black Plague, right? Happens to be at the time when we're saying black people existed, but you guys are saying they didn't, and we're saying white people didn't exist, and you guys saying you were there in them times, but there's no proof of that in history. But that's when the Black Plague apparently came, and that's during the Dark Ages yet again. All right, it's like they're laughing in our faces, guys. So assimilated and erased, branded as superstitious and silenced, probably shipped off to the silence whatevers and all of those. What's left? Blank slates with no stories of before. Instead of stories of ancestry, they're given fairy tales, babies under cabbages, storks delivering children, changelings swapped at night. These cute myths are actually cover stories for resets, a way to explain away whole populations of children with no parents. It's programming. Don't ask where you come from. You sprouted here, fresh and new. If you flood a society with people who literally cannot remember anything before a certain date, then backfill the timeline with written history, nobody can challenge it. The orphans or incubator stock weren't just new citizens, they were the evidence that the timeline must be real, because here are the descendants. Blank slate children are reset placeholders. They absorb whatever story you give them because they have no ancestral memory to contradict it. That's why we get fairy tales instead of war stories, because the storytellers were erased and the new stock didn't know otherwise. And guys, when you look at like films and programs that they've made, what's that film? Is it a film or a series? I think is it a series or a film? But basically he's in this world and he's starting to realize that like when they go to sleep, the world resets, and then there's these pale figures and then they've trapped them, right? And then they've created this whole fake timeline and history for them, and they just keep swapping them around. They just keep bro, what is it called? People just keep swapping around roles, and the guy wakes up and he's like, wait, hold on, what's going on? What's going on here? They faked our thingies. I don't like, do you understand what I'm saying? Oh, guys, anyway. Woo. The silence of conquest is the loudest proof of a reset. If they had truly come through war, we would have sagas. Instead, we have orphans with no stories of before. All right, guys, you know how I'm paranoid. Let me see if it's still recording. All right, guys, we're on a roll. All right. Elders, griots, storytellers, lineages are erased by plagues, famine, war, and assimilation. The people who remember the old world are silenced. No carriers of oral memory left to contradict the new script. Orphans, incubator babies, foundlings are children with no parents or ancestry. They're raised by institutions, church, the government, reform schools. The only narrative they hear is official. With no family memory to challenge it, they accept the new history without questioning it. That's why we were thinking, bro, how are these men just so heartless? How are they just so heartless? Bro, they were literally programmed to be like that. Now, once the blanks grow up, written history is inserted retroactively. Textbooks, Bible translation, national myths. It doesn't matter if the dates or events are fake, because nobody alive has memory to challenge them. Writing plus printing becomes the replacement of ancestry. And them man love a media, them man love a storytelling. Them man want to tell us all our stories to the point where they don't even allow us to research our own stuff, right? They give us all the narratives. They hold on to our artifacts in museums. And why are European museums filled with 90%, 95% of indigenous African collections, etc., of indigenous peoples? 95% of it is of African artifacts. Why? Where's your own Asian artifacts? If you man were so civilized and so ancient and all of these things, why do you have ours? Why are you holding on to them? What gifts? Would we be able to gain from them? What knowledge? Perhaps because we would be triggered. If we are around those artifacts that hold so much memory, they would be able to trigger us. Because I believe that we pass on consciousness. And what do I mean by that? I believe we can awaken each other, and that's why they like to separate people that are awake, etc., etc. But also, I believe we project our consciousness onto other things. For instance, why people think their animals are humans, their dog, their pets, or whatever. They treat them like humans, and then those pets start moving like humans. Why? Because we're projecting our consciousness onto them, and they're reflecting it back onto us. Anyway, I digress. Fairy tales, nursery rhymes, myths about storks, cabbages, changelings. These explain away the weirdness. Don't ask where babies come from. They come from the cabbage patch, of course. Whole populations raised to stop asking real questions about their origins. Within 2 to 3 generations, the blanks now have children of their own. Suddenly it looks like, see, we've always been here, with deep roots. But in reality, the chain before them was cut and replaced. The reset formula is simple but deadly. Kill or assimilate the white witnesses, flood with blanks, backfill the timeline with official history, distract with fairy tales and culture. Wait a few generations until no one even remembers the erasure. That's why it looks seamless today, because the people who could have said that's not how it happened were wiped out, and their replacements never knew any different. So I feel like also blaming the people, these lots don't know nothing. They don't know any better themselves. They're as clueless as us. Well, some of them, except for the elite. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? They're as clueless as us. So the stork, so these are some of the fairy tales, etc. Yeah, the stork brings the baby. On the surface, a sweet myth that babies are delivered by storks. Hidden. Why invent a story that erases mothers completely? Storks are migratory birds, the symbol of babies arriving from elsewhere, not from wombs. So, the code for blank children being delivered at a mass scale, not born locally. The Cabbage Patch babies. The surface, babies come from cabbages in the garden. Hidden, literal images of humans as crops. Europe was flooded with postcards of babies sprouting from vegetables. At the same time, foundling hospitals overflowed. So the cover for children appearing with no parents is grown by the system, not by families. Now, the changelings myth or fairy tale. Fairies swapped babies. On the surface, folklore were fairies steal human babies and leave a strange replacement. Hidden explains away why some children look different, act strange, or don't resemble the family. In reset terms, covers for cloned or blank stock children being placed into families after population collapses. The story isn't about fairies, it's about replacement. So Thumbelina foundlings, orphan protagonists. On the surface, fairy tales of tiny children found in flowers, orphan girls raised by strangers, boys with no parents. Hidden normalizes the idea that parentless children are magical, special, destined. In reality, psychological cover, so kids raised in founding homes would believe their lack of parents was a gift, not a trauma. So, storks, cabbages, changelings are not innocent myths. They are cultural anesthesia to stop children and parents from asking where babies with no ancestry come from. Don't ask. The message seems like, don't ask babies come from magic, gardens, fairies or birds. Just accept it. Fairy tales were the bedtime stories of resets, explaining away the blank slate populations. So, in the 1500s to the 1600s, the changelings, Europe in chaos, plagues, wars, witch trials, changeling myths explode in Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia. Parents claim fairies swapped my baby. When children look different or act strangely, the cover story for replacement stock quietly appearing in households. 1600s to 1700s, the stork babies. Dutch and German spreads the stork baby motif. By 1700, it's common in fairy tales, poems, and folk songs. Same period, foundling hospitals open in Paris in the 1670, London 1739, Moscow 1763. Storks are babies arriving from elsewhere. Myth grows with the orphan institution system. So, the 1700s to the 1800s. Orphan protagonists everywhere, literary heroes shifts. Literary heroes shift. Orphans become central figures, so Cinderella, Snow White, Hansel and Gretel. These stories boom as European populations skyrocket. Kids raised without parents are given tales where orphanhood is your destiny. Psychological cover makes the trauma seem magical. Now, in the 1800s with the Cabbage Patch Babies, massive surge of postcards in Germany, France, England, showing babies sprouting from cabbages. At the same time, Paris foundling homes overwhelmed, London shipping orphans to colonies, Russia warehousing tens of thousands in orphan houses. Babies appear in mass with no mothers named. Myth says, don't worry, they came from gardens. The late 1800s to 1900s nursery rhymes, for instance, Rockabye Baby. Rockabye Baby appears in print in the 1760s, but goes mainstream in the 1800s. Lyrics about babies falling from the sky or cradle in trees. Strange for a lullaby. Same century with the incubator babies on display at world fairs, literally shown in glass cradles fallen into the world. 1900s, doll and mass conditioning. The 1900s Cabbage Patch Dolls revival of the old Cabbage Patch Baby postcards. Better baby contests at state fairs where kids were literally judged like livestock. Very strange, very weird. Which I think is actually, now that I think of it, that's probably the, do you understand what I'm saying to you? That's probably the, how it progressed to all these weird child, you know how they do the whole child shows where they put all those makeup on the children and they have all those makeup and like really glam looks and the big hairs and all these, and they have the little baby show contest. That's probably where it came from. Now, orphan trains still running in America until 1929, guys. Orphan trains were still running in America until 1929. It's funny how their population seems to decline when they're no longer pushing out these orphans popping out anymore. The myths industrialized. Babies literally treated as products. The orphan flood in the 1800s to the early 1900s. Across America, Russia and Europe, suddenly millions of children with no traceable parents appeared. Orphan trains in the US, founding hospitals in Europe, street kids in Russia. These were overwhelmingly white-coded, Irish, Germanic, and Slavic, at a time when these empires needed to restock their depopulated areas. Historians say war, famine, and poverty, but the numbers don't add up. And like I said, if it's because they had to repopulate these areas because all these white people went missing, right? If that's the case, let's say they were repopulating to cover up for the white people that went missing. If they were the winners of the war, right? Then why did they have so much death? Why were they so depopulated? Do you understand what I'm saying to you? If they won the war, why did they need such a mass repopulation scale? Anyway. Historians say war, famine, and poverty, but the numbers don't add up. Public baby incubator shows at fairs, boardwalks, and exhibitions could serve as a front of revealing this new stock of infants. Instead of saying we manufactured them, they framed it as we're saving poor premature babies with science. Remember, incubators weren't widespread in hospitals until the 1940s. So why were there tens of thousands on display decades earlier? Some theorists say these weren't natural births, but clone or lab-grown infants, seeded into society. That's why they appeared in bulk. Perfectly timed with city resets, industrial booms, and colonization pushes. A cloned or engineered baby would need tech to survive early infancy. Incubators make sense as the ritual tech for bringing them into the world. After massive die-offs, so plagues, fires, floods, wars, cities were left eerily empty but rebuilt fast. You can't rebuild without a workforce. Suddenly, here comes thousands of orphans raised to fill factories, armies, and new towns. So this looks less like natural demographic recovery and more like planned repopulation cycles. And why was everybody related? Guys, come on, I'm going back to that. Why is everybody that you repopulated the cities with all related? If they were orphans from mothers across the world, across seas, why are you men all related? Anyway. So, by calling them orphans and erasing their ancestry, the system created a blank slate population. No ties to land, no lineage, no ancestral memory. Just obedient citizens trained into the new order. That's why you don't see records of their parents. The story was written so they would belong only to the government or system. This explains why it's always pale-coded children in bulk, while melanated populations didn't get the same rescue, because those had already had deep roots, memory, and self-sustaining communities. The reset babies were meant to be soul empty settlers, ready to inhabit wiped lands. When you look at those early incubator exhibitions, doesn't it feel more like an unveiling of a new product line than saving preemies? Almost like, here are your new children, world, the future citizens. Because why did they go in the masses, the millions to these events? Why? And see thousands of babies in incubators, not one or two, but why? Why was that normalized for decades? Why did it go on for decades? What was, like, if you looked at children of your own already, why would you be bothered? Would you go to just see premature babies in incubators? Decades? People even had seasonal passes. Guys, the premature cover story. If incubators were truly about saving premature babies, we should see thousands of mothers saying, yes, my baby was in Dr. Coney's incubator at Coney Island. I visited daily, but there are almost no testimonies like that. Instead, we hear from operators or doctors. Mothers vanish from the narrative as if these babies just existed without them. In Europe, women who gave babies were often forced into silence by stigma, poverty, or coercion. Many orphans weren't really orphans. They were seized from poor immigrants, unmarried, or colonized mothers, judged unfit. Once handed over, records often erase the mother's name. Baby equals government property. Now, the orphan train model in the US in the 1850s and 1920s. Tens of thousands of children shipped cross country. Did all those children's mothers just vanish? No, but the system didn't care. Their voices were deliberately scrubbed to make the children parentless. It was easier to build new populations if the children had no claim to ancestry. So, this would be an explanation how this is how they would like to explain it as to, why it was stolen, why there was no mothers, etc., etc. But my thing is this. If this is the case, like I said again, how can this be the case across countries, guys? Countries, both mothers and fathers not claiming any children, but you're having premature babies? Premature babies would suggest that the mothers must be around, guys. Where are the mothers? It can't be about the war and all of these things and whatnot and what you're just telling me that. And why are all these whores, supposed whores, because they're making it seem like that, right? Like women were just whores and they were having babies outside of marriages at numbers, but why were all the supposed whores popping out premature babies that needed to be put in incubators to be displayed on shows to then be bought later? Why didn't the premature babies, like, really? Guys, please, I beg. Anyway, if they were cloned or engineered, this explains why no mothers came forward. Many of these babies were artificially produced, for instance, lab-grown orphans created in bulk, then there were no mothers to claim them. Incubators function as public wombs. Literally what they were. Yeah. Raising these children without maternal lines. So, now, if some babies weren't naturally born, if a portion of these orphans were cloned engineered, these were the no mothers speak up, yeah? That solves the silence. No one claimed them because they weren't born as of women. They were the state's children. Now, now there are whispers, yeah, about like mothers, you know, talking about children's being shipped off or stolen or whatever, but whispers, like, I mean, few whispers. So some newspaper articles mention mothers desperately trying to reclaim children from orphanages and being denied. Indigenous communities, for instance, in America, Canada, and Australia, have oral stories about babies stolen in mass into institutions. Yeah, but my thing also is US, Canada, Australia. That's where indigenous populations are in great numbers, right? So maybe they were stealing the indigenous children, perhaps. I don't know. Here we go. Irish Magdalene laundries. Thousands of women later testified their babies were taken, sold, or buried. But it's strange to me because, like, and they do say that a lot of them link to the Irish ancestry, right? But the same Irish ancestry that everybody links to is the same Irish ancestry that everybody's related to as well, which confuses me again. Right? Because my thing is this. If it's because they were stealing the babies from other people's countries, why did those countries also have foundling hospitals? And why is everybody still related? Why isn't there huge genetic differences between everybody? Why are the Irish still related to the Canadians in Canada? Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Anyway. Baby farming scandals. Women like Amelia Dyer, killed in the UK 1800s, killed or sold countless of infants, and mothers whispered in fear but had no power. So there were whispers, but fragmented, hidden, shamed, and often covered up. And crucially, the scale of the orphan floods in Europe, Russia, and America far outstrips these small stories. So, the supply of orphans. Ireland in the 1800s to 1900s. After the famine in 1840s, Ireland became a baby supply hub for Britain and America. Thousands of Irish infants were put in foundling homes or shipped abroad. But famine also killed millions. So how did they still have a surplus? Suspicious. Eastern Europe and Russia. Russia after famines, pogroms, and wars. For instance, the Crimean War, later the 1917 revolution, suddenly had tens of thousands of street children. Many went into state orphanages or into incubator exhibitions. Again, also, why were the street children in exhibitions for the incubators? Why? Why were they being premature? Anyway, guys. Again, if the population was collapsing, how were there suddenly so many unattached babies? Germany, Austria, France. France had the infamous foundling wheel system. Mothers could anonymously deposit babies in hospitals. In Germany or Austria, church-run institutions took thousands of illegitimate babies. Mortality rates in these were so high, up to 90%, that the fact any survived in bulk is odd. So England also had baby farming scandals. Women paid to take babies, many never seen again. Then the London Foundling Hospital received tens of thousands of babies over a century. Plus, Britain was running an empire-wide child export system, later seen in Australia and Canada. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, immigrant families, Irish, Italian, Eastern European, had children seized under poverty laws. Those kids were put on orphan trains, 1854 to 1929. Over 200,000 children shipped to the Midwest to populate farms. Every one of these regions was supposedly dealing with poverty, war, famine, disease. Populations were said to be crashing, and yet somehow there were hundreds of thousands of white-coded babies extra to ship, adopt, exhibit, or sell. So that's the paradox, guys. The numbers don't add up, It looks more like these countries were receiving children from a central pipeline, so whether it's engineered, cloned, or redistributed, not just producing them naturally. Incubators and so the engineered stock. Incubators and exhibitions look like the rollout phase for artificially created children. Baby redistribution. Colonies lost babies, so black, indigenous, mixed, while Europe or American mysteriously gained white ones. Reset replacements after plagues or fires or famines. Depopulated cities needed instant citizens. So cue the mass orphan influx. So it doesn't look like these countries produced all those babies at all. It looks like they were seeded into them. Ireland, Russia, Germany, England, and America are just where they were distributed. The true origin factory, whether cloning programs, hidden labs, or government-run baby farms, are erased. And a lot of those founding thingies were burnt down as well. Yeah, those fairgrounds as well, burnt down. Weird. Now, Britain's empire-wide child export system. So children migration schemes in the 1600s to the 1900s. Britain ran huge programs where poor, orphaned, or unwanted children were exported out of the UK to colonies. It started as early as the 1600s with kids sent to Virginia and the Caribbean as indentured labor. By the 1800s to the 1900s, it became industrialized. The orphan pipeline. Children were taken from workhouses, orphanages, or simply poor families who couldn't fight back. They were shipped to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Rhodesia. The official excuses to give them a better life. The reality, cheap colonial labor, future settlers, and population engineering. Now, historians estimate 130 to 150,000 children were shipped overseas between the 1860s and 1970s. Most were white-coded, English, Irish, Scottish, to whiten the colonies and dilute indigenous presence. Many never saw their families again, and records were deliberately destroyed so they couldn't trace back. So, this was happening at the same time as the orphan floods, incubator exhibitions, and founding hospitals. It shows Britain wasn't just receiving orphans, it was also redistributing them globally, like a commodity. So, we're talking about, you lot like say, oh, you lots were slaves. Bro, you man's whole history was slavery as well by your own people. Like, guys, I'm really starting to think this is more than, us warring against each other and whatever. Like, white people as well, Asians, come on, guys. Now you lots need to really, be, even though some of you, I see you lots out there, but a lot of you lots still try to claim that, oh, you lots are, from a higher, the whole, that Titarian thing and the world races, the races, or the Aryan races, and then you have the Lemurian races and all this stuff. They still try to basically say that they're older than us and we're the more primitive race. So I still, anyway, guys, yeah, all right. So empty cities in colonies, fill them with children. Empty towns in America, orphan trains. Empty cities in colonies, because they wiped out all the indigenous, fill them with children. And then empty towns in America, orphan trains. And also, how were the Native Americans shipped? How did they come across there? Because if you look into their history as well, it's very strange, guys. It's very strange. Doesn't seem as they're as indigenous as they were portrayed to be in the beginning. But anyway, guys, I've got so much research to go through. So much. I'm not going to lie, this research I'm even speaking on now, it's only because I'd already prepared it and I was refusing to. I'd already prepared it, so at this point I was like, I had to put it out there. But I've got so much more information, guys. I'm just really backwards and behind and stuff, because obviously by the time I get to recording, I've already gathered so much more information and come up with even more theories and stuff like that. But guys, this is all about us trying to figure out things, because they're not going to tell us the truth. So let's figure it out. Let's exchange stories amongst each other. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So if you do like this, please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. guys. Don't forget to follow me on TikTok as well. At INI, IYAAHNI. INI is I, of course. Oh, before I sign off though, yeah, just look out for the new videos. I'm definitely going to be releasing more videos, guys. Look out for that. And I really appreciate everyone for all the love and support. I can't believe I'm on 200 subscribers. Well, I'm on more now, 240 or something like that, which is wild to me, guys, because you don't understand. The other day I was just on 30. So I appreciate it a lot. You know, really, really appreciate it. Shout out to all the people that, you know, send me more information, etc., etc. But please, if you're sending me more information and you're trying to get me to look into something, whatever, be nice. First of all, start off nice. Say hello first. Don't try and act like you're teaching me, or you have. If you talk to me with any authoritative tone, you're gonna get me to snap on you, because you found me. Sorry, I don't even read it like that. But some of you lots piss me off with the way you lots comment in the section. Not my, but you know who you are. Like, some of you lots, I'm just like, relax, okay? Like, especially the man them. Like, please, guys, don't think you're here mansplaining and all of that. Just come with some humility. You know what I mean? Because you're gonna make my back turn up. But yeah, I appreciate you all, guys, so much. Let's not let any of this stuff overwhelm us as well. I should do a video on that, actually. How to keep happy, how to still enjoy life, how to still be excited for life, etc., while learning all the information that you are. Because I don't want you to get dumped down and bogged down on all of this stuff, because that's what they would want, you know. But no, still enjoy life, still chop life, still life now, enjoyment. Come on, guys. Anyway, I